My name is Grace Rubio, and this is my mother, Leonila Rubio, the widow of Homero Rubio. He's the next employee at CCAD. He worked at CCAD between 1968 and 1989 when he retired. He first started seeing his illnesses even when he was working. Before he retired, he started getting cancer in his face. He had cancer in his chest and his arms. There was many times where they had to go and they had to burn his face to burn that cancer off. He, after he retired in 1989, he really started getting sick. About a year and a half after that, he went into the hospital. The doctor found out that he had cancer. They removed a cancerous portion of his vocal cords. And it was a very, very difficult time for us. It was a very difficult time for him. He went through a lot of humiliation because after the surgery he was not able to talk the way that he used to talk before. The recuperation took many, many months. He also started losing his teeth. They would just come out. He was able to pull out some of the teeth. And he also complained about, stomach problems. He had high blood pressure, and it was just very, very, very hard for him the few years after that he did retire. He passed away in September of 1996, and it was a very difficult time for all of us. We miss him very much. He was only 72 years old. When he started working at CCAD, he was a very healthy person, very strong, very energetic, and we just miss him very much. I just feel that he was taken away from us at a very early age. We miss his presence. He was our rock. We miss his sense of humor, his jokes. It's just been very hard for us and for my mother, being that she's on a limited income, very limited. The money problems have been very hard on her. So I just want to explain and tell you a little bit about what he would share with us as far as his job. He worked in the warehousing, shipping and receiving. He was one of the civilian workers that actually would unload these helicopters and all this equipment that was coming back directly from the war zone. I mean, he talked about some of the helicopters, how they had these limbs, and they were very dirty. There were, the helicopters were full of blood, lots of sand and dirt. They were just filled with lots of dirty items in them. And I remember sometimes they used to call him in the middle of the night that there was a ship that was coming in, and they would have to go over to the port of Corpus Christi and unload some of the helicopters. Also, there was the big airplanes that had the helicopters that would come in, and whatever time they were coming in, they would call him and he would go. He was one of the forklift operators and the loader operators, which would actually unload. So any equipment, any of the helicopters that were coming back, he always had direct contact. And he used to, come home and say, these helicopters, they were straight from the war zone. He was very, very proud that, he was serving his country. He might not have been there in Vietnam, but he was serving his country, doing what needed to be done, because the civilians here at CCAD, they were the support system. They were the ones that were supporting the war. It takes a whole country to fight a war, and that was just the part of what he did. And he had no idea that he was being exposed to all these chemicals and all these things that were coming back until, he started getting sick. And, even at that point, we didn't know that perhaps that was one of the reasons that he was getting sick. So he also was involved in expediting all this equipment and all the helicopters to the different departments. I know he would talk about some of the helicopters they would clean them first, and some of them needed to be overhauled. Some of them were just done away with if they weren't able to refurnish them. And so he just talked about some of the work that he did over there, and we just listened, because he was very proud of what he was doing. I know that recently we just found out that they were actually contaminated with some of these chemicals, and we were really surprised because we started thinking, he would come from working for hours and hours. Sometimes he would work through the night, and my mother would wash his clothes in with our clothes. I mean, we had no idea. We had no idea that we were also being exposed to all these chemicals. So that was, that was a surprise to us that we heard. I mean, I have a son, and my mother, they raised him, and he was born in 1964. And he was just diagnosed with, a couple of years ago, he was diagnosed with cancer. Also, my father also at one time, he came home and he told us that there was a snake in one of the helicopters. And I was just thinking, well, I don't remember if he said if it was alive or it was dead, but there was a snake, and he mentioned there was rats in there, dead rats in the helicopters. So, those are just some of the things that he shared with us. And I know that the government has admitted that these chemicals that these veterans were exposed to, that they do have an effect on their health. And so what about these civilian men that were working back here in the United States? What about them? They actually didn't set foot in Vietnam, but all the equipment and helicopters and everything that came back from the war, I mean, they had direct contact with that sand, with all the dirt, with everything. And so I believe that they were also fighting the war. It was in an indirect way, although they weren't out there in the front lines, but it was in an indirect way. I have a brother, his name is Hector Rubio, and he actually served in Vietnam. He is a veteran, and he has not received any compensation or anything because the only thing that he has is high blood pressure. I know he has stomach problems, and he really isn't aware at this point. But my father put in 20 years of his life there at CCAD, and most of those years were handling the equipment coming back from the war. So if the government has already admitted that this is dangerous to the veterans' health, they shouldn't forget the civilian workers that supported this war.
My grandson.
Yes.
Did they give your father any safety equipment?
No, that was another thing. He never had any safety equipment. The only thing that we saw is that he had with him was just safety glasses. That's all. But other than that, they were never told that they needed to wear, I never saw any gloves or anything, so they weren't told they needed to wear any.
Besides cancer, did he have any, like sugar diabetes?
We never knew about diabetes. I know that I was recently diagnosed as borderline, and we don't have any members of the family with diabetes, and I was shocked.